Vladimir Vladimirovich, we have just observed your meeting on rare earth metals. Excuse me, but I believe that at this moment, all journalists around the world are interested in rare earth metals, albeit from a somewhat different perspective. After all, the United States is, to put it mildly, strongly urging Zelensky to sign an agreement with them regarding these resources as payment for the aid provided to Ukraine by the previous administration, the Biden administration. How do you assess the prospects of such an agreement? This does not concern us. I do not assess it in any way and do not even wish to think about it. Of course, these resources should be evaluated, their actual availability, their volume, their value, and so on. But again, I repeat, this is not our business. What is our business, however, is what we discussed at today's meeting. Rare and rare earth metals are extremely important components, very valuable resources for modern industries. And we are currently doing very little in this field, we must do more. The purpose of today's meeting was precisely to focus, at this initial stage, administrative resources on developing this area. By the way, we would also be open to working with our American partners. And when I say partners, I do not mean only administrative or government structures, but also companies, should they show interest in working together. Without a doubt, our reserves of such resources are an order of magnitude, let me emphasize this, an order of magnitude greater than those in Ukraine. Russia is indisputably one of the global leaders in terms of reserves of these rare and rare earth metals. We have them in the north, in Murmansk, in the Caucasus, in Kabarda, in Balkaria, in the Far East, in the Irkutsk region, in Yakutia, and in Tuva. These are capital-intensive investments, large-scale projects requiring significant capital. We would be happy to collaborate with any foreign partners, including American ones. And, by the way, regarding the new territories, the same applies. Even in the new regions? Yes, of course. These days, we are witnessing a flurry of statements and discussions. Everyone is talking about Trump, why he is speaking so harshly, saying that Zelensky must go to elections, that his rating is at 4%. Europeans are heavily criticizing Trump for these remarks. There are even opinions emerging that the current approach of the US president is actually playing into Russia's hands. Do you think this is true? I believe this is absolutely untrue. My viewpoint is entirely opposite to the one you just expressed. The fact is that the current head of the Kyiv regime is becoming a toxic figure for the Ukrainian armed forces because he issues orders that are dictated not by military considerations but by political ones, and it is unclear what these are based on. This has led to unjustified, extremely heavy, if not catastrophic losses for the Ukrainian army. He is also becoming toxic for society as a whole, as evidenced, in my opinion, by today's vote in the Rada on extending his powers. Finally, he has backed himself into a corner with his decree banning negotiations with the Russian Federation on a peace agreement. He unilaterally terminated those talks. Why? Because he is deliberately avoiding negotiations. Why? Because if negotiations begin, sooner or later, most likely quite quickly, this will necessitate lifting martial law. And as soon as that happens, elections must take place immediately. There will be no grounds to avoid them anymore. Today, elections in Ukraine are not being held under the pretext of martial law. If negotiations start, this could soon require lifting martial law, which in turn would mean immediate elections. And here lies the real problem for the current head of the regime. Because it's not about whether his rating is 4% or some other figure, the key issue is that, based on our data, which is objective, his rating is exactly half that of his closest potential rival. That rival is General Zaluzhny, the former commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, who was exiled to London. His rating is precisely twice as high. And if we add to this the potential support for this candidate from other political figures including former prime ministers and former presidents, the chances of the current regime winning the election become absolutely non-existent. They are zero. Unless, of course, something is crudely falsified, but even then, it would be so blatantly obvious that it would cause additional problems for him. Thus, he has become a destabilizing factor for the army, society, and the state as a whole. And the sitting US President, Donald Trump, surely understands this and is pushing him toward elections. What does he want to achieve? As I see it, he wants to restore political stability in Ukraine, consolidate society, and create conditions for the survival of the Ukrainian state. In the grand scheme of things, this is not so much to Russia's advantage after all. Our conflict is with the current regime, but rather to Ukraine's benefit. Moreover, the current US president has declared that he wants to achieve peace. Incidentally, we want the same and as soon as possible. But the current head of the regime stands in the way of achieving that goal. This, I believe, explains the position of the President of the United States. And this is not related to the fact that it aligns with our interests, Russia's interests. Rather, it is most likely in the interests of Ukraine, the Ukrainian state, aimed at preserving Ukrainian statehood, something we have no objections to. Of course, we would prefer that this territory not be used as a staging ground for attacks on the Russian Federation, that it not serve as a hostile platform against us, and that, ultimately, it transforms into a friendly neighboring state. We have already heard numerous statements from Trump day in and day out. You have met with him multiple times, and you recently had a phone conversation with him. Does he act based on emotions? Of course not. Naturally, the current head of the Kyiv regime gives reason to display such emotions, but from what I have just outlined, an entirely different picture emerges. His actions are not driven by emotion but rather by cold calculation and a rational approach to the situation at hand. As strange as it may seem, we were actually interested in having him remain in power and continue dismantling the regime with which we are engaged in an armed conflict. However, from the standpoint of strengthening Ukrainian statehood, a different course of action is required, one that is more decisive and directed in a completely different direction, bringing to power individuals who enjoy the trust of the Ukrainian people. But do the Europeans even understand the essence of the current situation surrounding Ukraine? That is something you would have to ask them. Judging by their actions, I would say they do not fully grasp it. But that is not even the main issue. The real issue is that, unlike the new US president, European political leaders are entangled with the current regime. They are deeply invested and have said and promised too much. Now, to put it plainly, backing away from this position is extremely difficult, if not practically impossible, without a loss of face. Given that they are in a rather complex and politically sensitive period of elections, re-elections, and parliamentary challenges, changing their stance is nearly impossible. Unlike them, the sitting US president, the newly elected president, has his hands free. He is unbound by these constraints that prevent progress and hinder efforts toward conflict resolution. Moreover, it is in his nature to act straightforwardly, without excessive restraint. His situation is unique. He does not just say what he thinks, he says what he wants. Well, that is a privilege of a leader of a great power. A few days ago in St. Petersburg, I asked you about how everyone now wants to have a say in Russian-American negotiations. Yet the Europeans continue to insist on demanding a voice in the negotiations surrounding Ukraine. How do you interpret this? I do not see anything wrong with it. No one can demand anything here, at least not from Russia. Let them demand it from someone else. For centuries, they have been making demands of their vassals. Now, demands are being made of them. So, let them sit at home and reflect on how they ended up in this situation. That said, their participation in the negotiation process is, of course, relevant. We have never rejected it. We have always maintained discussions with them. It was at a certain point, under the pretext of defeating Russia on the battlefield, that they themselves cut off contact with us. If they wish to return, they are welcome to do so. I have seen the reactions to my phone conversation with the US President and the high-level meeting in Riyadh. They are indeed emotional and lack any practical significance. Why? Because in order to resolve complex and even acute issues, including the Ukrainian track, Russia and the United States must first take an initial step. What does this step entail? It must be aimed at increasing the level of trust between the two nations. That is precisely what we were doing in Riyadh, and that is exactly what upcoming high-level meetings will focus on. Without this, it is impossible to resolve a single issue, including such a complex and pressing one as the Ukrainian crisis. But what do the Europeans have to do with this? This concerns bilateral Russian-American relations. What role do they have here? What will they be doing? In both my phone conversation and the meeting in Riyadh, the Ukrainian issue was not substantively discussed. We only agreed that we would eventually address it. In this regard, of course, we do not see a role for European countries. However, I want to emphasize that we respect the position of our BRICS friends, who have established a peace coalition. Just today, I spoke with the chairman of the People's Republic of China, and we discussed this matter as well. He informed me that this peace coalition will convene again in New York in the near future to deliberate on the issue. We do not merely attend, we appreciate all our partners who raise these concerns and strive for a peaceful resolution. Not only Europeans but also other countries have the right and the ability to participate, and we respect that. I would like to ask for your comment on a few more of Trump's statements, of which, as I mentioned, there are many. But not all of them. For example, he said he wants to propose to you and the Chinese leader that defense budgets be cut in half. What do you think of that idea? I have an idea of what it might be based on. It seems to stem from the calculations of one of the British research centres, which estimated defence spending in terms of purchasing power parity. Last year, if I remember correctly, US defense spending amounted to approximately $968 billion. If we combine Russian and Chinese defense expenditures, the total figure is roughly comparable to the American budget. However, first of all, this needs to be calculated properly. These are figures from a British think tank. They may be accurate, inaccurate, or entirely incorrect. This needs to be carefully examined. That is the first point. The second is that I cannot comment on how the People's Republic of China would respond to this proposal. There have been various approaches from the American side regarding strategic offensive weapons and other serious issues. This is a matter for the People's Republic of China to decide. However, we could negotiate with the United States. We are not opposed. I believe the idea is a good one. If the United States cuts its defense budget by 50%, we would do the same. And then, if the People's Republic of China wishes, it could join in at a later stage. We believe this is a good proposal and are open to discussions on the matter. Trump also introduced a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from all countries. At one time, we had quite productive cooperation with the US in the aluminum sector. What do you think of such a trade policy? I do not wish to comment on US trade policy at this moment. For many years, it has been closely linked to sanctions. We consider these sanctions to be unlawful and detrimental to global trade and the economy. In my view, they harm not only us but also those who impose them. As for trade policies, increased tariffs, duties, and so on, each country determines for itself what is beneficial and what is not. The rationale is understandable: to relocate production domestically, create jobs, and ensure tax revenues at all levels. However, at some point, these measures will inevitably encounter difficulties related to inflationary pressure, rising costs of goods, and other challenges. But experts can explain this in greater detail. Regarding aluminum, in 2017, if I recall correctly, Russia supplied about 15% of total US aluminum imports. Overall, the US produces about 60% of its required aluminum domestically and imports the remaining 40%. Of this, 15% came from Russia. The primary importer today is Canada. If the US were to reopen its market to Russian producers, we could supply around 2 million tons annually. This would not significantly impact price formation, but in my opinion, it would help stabilize prices. More importantly, we could explore joint projects with American companies in this sector. For instance, in the Soviet era, there were plans to build a new hydroelectric power station in the Krasnoyarsk region and expand aluminum production. Aluminum production primarily depends on energy, preferably cheap energy. Hydropower is both cost-effective and environmentally friendly. Such plans existed in the past. Admittedly, this is a capital-intensive and investment-heavy project. According to preliminary estimates, its cost in today's terms would be around $15 billion. Nevertheless, it is worth considering. While the current U.S. administration prioritizes domestic production, if American companies were to operate in Russia, they would also reap significant benefits. This would generate substantial profits for their businesses and ensure stable aluminum supplies to the domestic market at fair market prices. There is much to think about here, just as there is in terms of cooperation on rare earth metals and other sectors, including energy. Incidentally, just a few minutes ago, I read another piece of news from the US. President Trump announced that the United States and Russia are discussing major economic projects as part of negotiations on Ukraine. Yes, some of our companies are in contact with their American counterparts, and such projects are indeed being discussed. Thank you very much. Thank you.